The first night in my new apartment, someone knocked 3 times on my door at exactly 12:03 a.m. I hadn't even unpacked my boxes yet, hadn't even connected the Wi-Fi, and I was already standing frozen in the dark, wondering why anyone in their right mind would be knocking past midnight. Chicago has a reputation, sure, but this wasn't the South Side or some rundown corner. It was a pretty normal brick building, the kind of place you find on Craigslist listed as cozy, affordable downtown access. The rent was suspiciously low, lower than anything else I'd seen within 5 miles, but I was broke, drowning in freelance contracts that never paid on time, and I convinced myself I'd just gotten lucky. Lucky isn't the word I'd use now. Earlier that evening, when I was looking for a clean spoon in the kitchen drawers, I found a folded piece of paper shoved all the way in the back. It was yellowed, edges crumbling like it had been sitting there for decades. 7 sentences typed in block letters. Don't look in the mirror after midnight. Don't open the door if someone knocks 3 times unless you ordered food. If the hallway light on the 4th floor flickers, use the stairs, not the elevator. If you hear a baby crying from 3B, turn around and cover your ears. If the stove turns on by itself, let it burn. If you see Mrs. Kaplan after midnight, it's not her. And never ever stay alone in the apartment after 2 a.m. I laughed, tossed it onto the counter, and figured some old tenant had left behind their weird writing exercise. But when the knocking came, steady and deliberate, 3 perfect knocks against my door, the laugh died in my throat. My first instinct was to check the peephole, but when I leaned in, there was nothing. Just the dim hallway, quiet and empty. I gripped the doorknob anyway, half ready to open it, when I remembered the second line of the list. My hand froze. I whispered to myself that it was just a prank, some drunk neighbor. But then the knocks came again, louder this time, rattling the frame. My phone buzzed on the counter with a text from Andre, the guy I'd just agreed to split the rent with. Running late, gig at the bar went long. Don't wait up? Which meant I was completely alone. I sat on the couch staring at that piece of paper like it had grown teeth. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but the screen light made the rest of the apartment feel darker, the shadows stretching in every corner. I thought about my parents back in New Mexico telling me to be careful moving to Chicago, thought about my bank account balance that barely covered first month's rent, and told myself no matter how weird this place was, I couldn't afford to leave, not yet. Around 12:30, the knock stopped, replaced by silence so deep it made my ears ring. I finally worked up the nerve to peek into the bathroom, flicking on the light just to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. But the first thing I saw was the mirror fogged over, as if someone had just stepped out of a shower I hadn't taken, and there in the condensation was a handprint, not mine. That was the moment I stopped thinking of the list as a joke. I didn't sleep after that first night, I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that handprint spreading across the glass, fingers dragging down, nails screeching. Even though the bathroom was silent when I finally checked again, the mirror clean, no fog, no trace that anyone had touched it, I told myself maybe I'd left the shower on earlier. But the truth was I hadn't even unpacked towels yet. There was no way. The next morning, Andre showed up with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, looking like he hadn't slept either. His eyes bloodshot, but not from fear. From whatever cocktail he'd been mixing with his DJ shifts. He tossed his bag into the smaller bedroom and grinned. "So, how's our haunted palace? Any rats?" I didn't tell him about the knocks or the mirror, not then. I didn't want him laughing it off, but I slid the folded note across the counter. He read it once, snorted, and said, "Urban legends, man. Every old building's got them. Relax, we'll be fine." He pocketed the note like it was nothing, like it wasn't the only thing keeping me from opening the door last night, and I let him, maybe hoping if I ignored it long enough it would stop being real. For the next few days, things were almost normal. I worked late into the night on my laptop, the glow of the screen keeping me sane. Andre stumbled in at odd hours, sometimes at dawn, sometimes not at all. The building itself felt quiet, too quiet for Chicago. No dogs barking, no TVs blaring through the walls, just the hum of the old radiator and the occasional drip from the pipes. On the 4th night it happened again, just after midnight. I was brushing my teeth when the bathroom light flickered. I froze with the toothbrush halfway to my mouth, staring at the mirror, and I swear I saw someone behind me, just a blur, too quick, like the shadow of myself walking the other way. I spun around, but the bathroom was empty. No sound, no movement. The air cold enough that I could see my breath. The toothbrush clattered into the sink and I backed out, slamming the door. I told myself not to look, not to check again. But curiosity gnawed at me until midnight, when I forced myself back in. Heart hammering, and this time the mirror didn't fog. It reflected clear, too clear, and staring back at me was me. Same messy hair, same stubble. But my reflection didn't move when I lifted my hand. Didn't blink when I blinked, it just stood there smiling. Slow and wrong. I stumbled back so hard I hit the door, my shoulder bruising, my reflection's smile widening, teeth showing too much. Then in a voice muffled like it came from behind glass, it whispered, "You're late." My chest seized. I flipped the switch, plunging the bathroom into darkness, and when I flicked it back on, the mirror was empty. Just me again, shaking, sweating, pale. Andre barged in groggy and annoyed. "Dude, what the hell?" "It's 2 a.m. I grabbed his arm, babbling about the reflection, the smile, the voice, but he just laughed. "You've been watching too many horror podcasts," and went back to bed, leaving me alone with the silence. The next day, I cornered Mrs. Kaplan in the hallway. She was balancing a bag of groceries, her hands trembling with age. I offered to carry them, but she shook her head sharply. "Don't look in the mirror after midnight. That's the first one for a reason." Her voice cracked, softer now. "That's how it starts once it notices you. It won't stop." I asked her who wrote the rules, who left them in my drawer, but she only pressed her lips together, eyes darting to the empty hallway as if someone might be listening, then whispered, "They don't want you to know. They just want you to obey." She hurried into her apartment, slamming the door, leaving me with more questions and no answers. That night, Andre came home early. Unusually quiet, he sat on the couch staring at the blank TV, a beer sweating in his hand. Finally, he said, "I saw something too. In the mirror at the bar bathroom. Thought it was just me being drunk, but it didn't blink." His laugh was hollow, forced. "So maybe your rules aren't total crap." Relief washed over me that I wasn't alone, but it quickly turned to dread, because if we were both seeing it, then it wasn't just imagination. It was real, and it was spreading. We agreed to keep the bathroom light off after midnight, to avoid mirrors entirely if we could, but the apartment itself seemed to conspire against us, reflective surfaces showing things that weren't there. The black screen of my laptop catching glimpses of someone walking behind me, the glass on the microwave door showing Andre standing in the kitchen, even though he was asleep in his room. By the 6th night, the rules weren't just warnings. They were chains, binding us to routines that made no sense but felt necessary. I taped a towel over the bathroom mirror, avoided windows after midnight, unplugged anything with a reflective surface, but still I'd catch my reflection moving wrong in the corner of my eye, grinning when I wasn't, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Andre started leaving the apartment more, crashing at the bar or with friends, anything to avoid being here, leaving me alone against Rule 7, never be alone after 2 a.m. I begged him to stay, but he brushed me off, said I was paranoid. That night, exactly 2:17 a.m., the bathroom door creaked open on its own, even though I'd locked it, even though I'd covered the mirror. And from the darkness inside, I heard my own voice whisper, "Michael, let's switch places, you'll sleep better." I froze on the couch, staring at the shadow stretching longer across the floor, my hands shaking, my phone buzzing with a text from Andre. "Be home soon. Don't wait up." Which meant I was alone, already breaking the last rule, and the mirror wasn't just waiting anymore, it was calling. Andre slept most of the next day, headphones still hanging around his neck. Music faint enough that I could hear his uneven breathing. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that folded piece of paper like it was a bomb, every word on it heavier now that I'd seen what the mirror could do. Every rule no longer just paranoia but survival. Around noon, I decided I needed answers, so I knocked on Mrs. Kaplan's door with a pit in my stomach. She opened a crack, chain still on, one sharp eye peering out at me. "You read the rules," she said. Not a question but a statement, her voice flat. I nodded, asked her if she wrote them, if she knew who did, if any of this had happened before. She studied me in silence, then unlatched the chain and let me in. Her apartment smelled of mothballs and strong coffee, blinds drawn tight. Not a single mirror in sight, not even on the bathroom wall, I noticed. She sat at a small round table stacked with old newspapers, gesturing for me to sit. "This building is older than it looks," she said finally, her fingers trembling as she set down her cup. "Before it was apartments, it was something else. A boarding house. Then before that, it was a children's hospital. The walls have seen more death than life. When I moved in 40 years ago, the rules were already here. taped to the wall in my kitchen. Different words, but the same warnings. I asked her if anyone had left. If anyone had escaped, she smiled sadly. People come and go, but not all of them leave. Some stay behind, in pieces. She tapped the folded paper in my hand, her eyes narrowing. Keep it close, boy. Those rules aren't superstition, they're instructions. Back in my apartment, Andre was awake. Sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He smirked when he saw me. So you had tea with Kaplan, huh? Did she tell you the place is cursed by Al Capone's ghost? I told him what she said about the hospital, about the rules predating her, but he just shrugged. Every building in Chicago's got a creepy story. Doesn't mean we're living in a horror movie. I wanted to argue, but the words died in my throat because part of me wished he was right. Part of me wanted desperately to believe it was all in my head. That night around 11, the hallway outside our apartment was unusually busy. Footsteps up and down the stairs. Doors opening and closing. Muffled conversations. Things I hadn't heard since I moved in. It almost felt normal. Alive. I cracked the door to peek, but the hallway was empty. No sound, no movement, just the flickering fluorescent buzzing faintly. I locked it again and sat back on the couch, heart pounding. Andre laughed from the kitchen. Man, you're jumpy. It's just thin walls. But half an hour later, just past midnight, it started. A faint sound drifting through the floorboards, soft and wet like someone crying. At first I thought it was a baby next door, muffled through the walls, but it grew clearer, higher pitched, unmistakable. A baby crying down the hall, coming from apartment 3B. Andre froze. Beer halfway to his lips, his eyes wide. You hear that? I nodded slowly, my throat dry, the paper in my pocket crinkling as I pulled it out with shaking hands. Rule 4. If you hear a baby crying from 3B, turn around and cover your ears. My stomach turned to ice. Andre whispered, that place is empty, right? It's been empty since we got here. The crying grew louder, echoing through the hallway, a baby wailing, desperate, hurting. Andre stood up, shaking his head. It's probably just some kid visiting, man, chill. But his voice was thin, unsure. I grabbed his arm, whispering, don't go out there. The rules... But he pulled free, pacing toward the door, muttering, I just want to check. The crying was almost deafening now, like it was right outside. Each sob piercing straight into my skull. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, repeating to myself, turn around, cover your ears, the words burning in my head. Through my fingers, I heard Andre's footsteps creak across the floorboards, then the door latch click. My chest seized, I screamed his name, but he didn't stop. I risked a glance. He had the door cracked, peering into the hallway, his face pale, eyes unfocused. The crying cut off instantly. Silence, heavy and absolute. Andre whispered, it knows me. I stumbled forward, yanked him back, slammed the door, locked it, my heart hammering. What the hell did you see? His face was blank, lips trembling. It was just shadows, but one of them. It said my name, man. It sounded like my mom. He sank onto the couch, shaking, sweat dripping down his temples. I shoved the note into his hands, jabbing at the line. You can't break them, you hear me? Not one. He nodded, but his eyes were distant, like something had already sunk its hooks into him. The rest of the night we sat in silence, every creak of the building making us jump. The crying didn't return, but I swore I heard soft cooing once, like a baby being soothed. And Andre flinched, pressing his fists against his temples. When the first light of dawn finally seeped through the blinds, he stood abruptly, muttering, I need a drink, and left without looking at me. I sat alone at the table with the note spread flat, the words staring back at me, and for the first time I realized this wasn't just about surviving the nights. The rules weren't keeping us safe, they were keeping whatever lived here fed. Andre didn't come home until the following evening, reeking of liquor and sweat. His clothes wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He collapsed onto the couch without a word, headphones blasting low bass in his ears. I didn't press him, but I noticed the way his hands trembled when he pulled the blanket over himself, the way he flinched every time the pipes groaned. I sat at the table pretending to work on my laptop, but my eyes kept drifting to the hallway door, waiting for the crying to return. Nothing happened that night. No knocks, no whispers, no baby. Just silence so deep it felt like the building was holding its breath. I almost convinced myself the whole thing had been a nightmare. But Andre wasn't the same, he barely spoke. And when he did, it was short-clipped, distracted. 2 nights later, around 11:45, I heard him pacing in the kitchen, muttering under his breath. I pulled my earbuds out and listened. His words were jumbled, but one phrase cut through. She needs me. My stomach dropped. I walked in and found him standing by the stove, staring at the burners even though they were cold, his hands clenched into fists. I asked what he was doing. He snapped his head toward me like he hadn't realized I was there, his eyes wide, sweat dripping down his temple. "You don't hear it?" he whispered. I shook my head, but then, faint and fragile, it started again, the baby crying, muffled, drifting through the walls. My skin prickled. I grabbed his arm. "Andre, don't listen, you know the rule," but he shook me off violently, his face twisting. "What if it's real, man? What if there's actually a kid out there?" His voice cracked with desperation. The same guy who used to laugh off everything, now begging me to let him go check. The crying grew louder, closer, like it was just outside our door. A baby wailing in pain, the kind of sound that claws at your instincts, makes you want to help no matter what. My head throbbed, my chest tightening, every part of me screaming to open the door to run into the hall. But the rule burned in my mind. Turn around and cover your ears. I pressed my palms hard against the sides of my head, backing toward the living room, shouting at Andre to do the same. But he staggered to the door, hand on the knob, tears in his eyes. "It's calling me," he whispered, and I saw his reflection in the microwave door, distorted and grinning even though he was crying. My heart lurched. I lunged forward, slammed the deadbolt shut before he could twist the knob. He pounded his fists against the wood, shouting curses, begging me to open it, then crumpled to the floor, sobbing. The crying outside stopped immediately, cut off mid-wail, leaving only the sound of Andre's ragged breaths. Later, when he calmed down, he wouldn't look at me, wouldn't answer when I asked what he saw, what he heard. He just repeated, "She knows my name," over and over until he passed out. I sat awake the rest of the night, staring at the shadows shifting across the ceiling, feeling like every sound in the building was a trap waiting to spring. The next day, I knocked on Kaplan's door again, desperate for answers. She opened wider this time, her face lined with exhaustion, eyes heavy as if she hadn't slept in weeks. I told her about the crying, about Andre, about how close he came to opening the door. She listened quietly, then nodded as if it confirmed something she already knew. 3B has been empty since the fire in '72, she said softly. But sometimes emptiness makes more noise than the living. It's not a child, not anymore. It's the building wearing the sound of one. I asked her what it wanted, why it kept calling Andre, why it knew his name. She hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Because once you hear it, you're marked. It won't stop until you answer." I left her apartment shaking, clutching the paper like a lifeline, realizing the rules weren't just prevention. They were chains to keep us from being pulled under. Andre barely got out of bed that day, eyes hollow, staring at the wall, mumbling in his sleep. When I tried to shake him awake, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and whispered, "She's in the walls." That night, I pushed the dresser against the door, piled chairs in front of it, anything to keep him from leaving. But at 12:15, the crying started again, louder, angrier, echoing through the vents, and Andre shot up, eyes wild. "I can't ignore her anymore," he shouted, struggling against me, his fist slamming into my chest. I held him down, begging him to stop, screaming over the wails. And for a moment I thought the building itself was shaking, plaster dust raining from the ceiling. Then just as suddenly, silence. Andre went limp, gasping for air, his face wet with tears. He whispered, "If I don't answer, she'll come in." I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat by the barricaded door with a baseball bat in my lap, watching him twitch in his sleep, hearing phantom cries echo in my head even though the apartment was dead quiet. At dawn, the crying stopped completely, replaced by something worse. Laughter, faint, childlike, drifting from apartment 3B. By the time the laughter faded from 3B, Andre was a wreck. He barely ate, barely slept. His headphones no longer blasting music but sitting around his neck like a broken shield. I caught him standing at the window one afternoon, staring down at the street, eyes glassy, lips moving like he was in a conversation only he could hear. When I asked what he was doing, he snapped back so fast I jumped. "She's quieter during the day," he muttered, then walked away before I could say anything. I stopped leaving him alone, shadowing him from room to room, and that's when it happened, the next rule testing us. It was just past midnight, the air thick with summer heat, the radiator hissing like it had a voice of its own. When I heard the click of the stove knobs in the kitchen, my stomach dropped. I was in the living room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to pretend the world was normal. but that sound froze me. One knob, then another, then the distinct whoosh as blue flames leapt to life. I crept toward the kitchen, heart hammering, and sure enough, all 4 burners were on, flames dancing tall and steady even though no one had touched them. Andre appeared behind me, hair wild, eyes wide, whispering, "It's hungry." Every instinct screamed to turn them off, to grab the knobs and shut the gas before the whole place went up. But the rule echoed in my head. If the stove turns on by itself, let it burn. My palms itched with sweat, the heat of the flames licking my face, Andre stepping closer, transfixed, his shadow stretching across the wall like it didn't belong to him. "Do you see him?" he whispered. I shook my head, choking on fear. "See who?" Andre's voice cracked. "The man in the fire." And then I saw it too. Not clear, not solid, but in the heart of the flames a face took shape, old and lined, mouth twisted like it was screaming or smiling, I couldn't tell. Eyes hollow but watching. My knees went weak. The face flickered with the flame, shifting, breaking apart, then reforming. Andre laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "That's him. That's the one who built this place." The heat grew unbearable. Sweat pouring down my neck, I wanted to run but couldn't move, pinned by that empty gaze staring from inside the fire. Then Kaplan's voice rang in my head from the last time we spoke. "It's not a child. It's the building wearing the sound of one." And I realized this was the same thing. The building showing us another mask. The man in the flames opened his mouth wider and wider until the fire itself roared, the blue tongues stretching high like they would swallow the ceiling. Andre shouted over the noise, "He wants something from me." And before I could stop him, he reached his hand toward the burner. I tackled him hard to the ground, the 2 of us crashing into the table, beer bottles shattering, the roar of the flames dropping instantly back to a quiet crackle. I pinned him down, shouting in his face, "You can't touch it, you'll be gone, do you hear me?" He fought me weakly, sobbing, "But he promised it would stop if I just..." His words died in his throat, eyes rolling back. I dragged him away from the kitchen, slammed the bedroom door, and shoved a chair under the handle, my heart pounding. The flame still burned on the stove, steady and patient, casting eerie shadows through the crack of the door. I sat against the wall until dawn, watching the glow fade only when the first light of morning touched the window. By then, Andre was asleep, whimpering in his dreams, sweat soaking the sheets. I went to Kaplan that afternoon, hands shaking, telling her everything. She didn't look surprised. She poured black coffee into a chipped mug and slid it toward me. "That rule keeps the hunger contained," she said, her eyes sharp despite her frail frame. "If you smother the fire, it takes its due from flesh instead. I've seen it happen." I asked her who the man was, the one in the flames. She hesitated, staring into her cup. "There was a caretaker once when this was still a boarding house. He was cruel. Took from the tenants, locked children in the basement. When he died, they said his spirit clung to the walls, feeding on anyone who stayed. The rules keep him in his cage." Her voice dropped to a whisper, "But cages rust, and he's getting stronger." I wanted to believe she was just an old woman spinning stories, but the burns on my arms from standing too close to the stove were real. Angry red marks that throbbed every time I moved. Andre avoided me for the rest of the day, pacing the apartment like a trapped animal, muttering to himself. When I asked if he remembered what happened, he shook his head violently, shouting, "You're lying, none of this happened," then slamming his door. I didn't push it, but I knew the building had its hooks in him deeper than ever. That night I unplugged everything reflective, covered the mirrors, double-checked the locks, but when the clock hit midnight, the stove clicked again. The flames roared to life, taller than before, and this time I didn't go near. I sat in the living room with my hands pressed over my ears, refusing to look, refusing to move, but I could feel the heat creeping under the door, hear the faint whisper of a man's voice promising relief, promising silence if I would just obey him instead of the paper. Andre's door creaked, his bare feet dragging across the floor, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't step into the kitchen. He stopped just outside, voice small, broken. "She's crying again." My blood ran cold. There was no crying, not tonight, only fire. But the building was twisting him, mixing the rules, blurring the lines until neither of us could tell what was real anymore. The fire hissed louder, shadows flickering across the walls like figures dancing, and I thought about Rule 7, never be alone after 2 a.m., how it wasn't just about fear, it was about having someone to pull you back when the voices came. If Andre gave in, I would be alone, and then it would be my turn. I slammed his door shut, locked it, and pressed my back against it, whispering the rules over and over until the flames finally died at dawn. Andre barely spoke for 2 days after the fire incident, his eyes hollow, his voice reduced to mutters I couldn't always understand. Sometimes he sat on the couch staring at the stove even when it was cold. Sometimes he whispered into his phone with no call connected. I didn't know how much longer I could keep him tethered to reality. And honestly, I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep myself tethered either. I kept repeating the rules like a prayer, like mantras, and that's when it happened again. The next test. It was past midnight, the air thick and stale. The hum of the fridge, the only sound in the apartment when the knocking came. Not 3 knocks this time, but a soft, steady tap, tap, tap. And when I looked through the peephole, my stomach turned to stone. It was Mrs. Kaplan. She stood there in her faded cardigan, hair in curlers, a Tupperware dish clutched in her wrinkled hands, smiling faintly as if she just baked cookies and wanted to share. My first instinct was relief. Maybe she'd come to check on us. Maybe she'd heard Andre screaming the other night. But then the rule slammed into my skull like a hammer. If you see Mrs. Kaplan after midnight, it's not her. I stepped back from the door, whispering, "No, no, no," but the knocking grew louder, more insistent. The smile through the peephole stretching wider, her teeth too white in the dim hall. "Michael?" Her voice came muffled through the wood. "I made your favorite, don't you want some?" My throat closed. She had never asked my favorite anything. Never even stepped foot into our place. How could she know? Andre shuffled out of his room then, eyes bleary, face slack. "Who's that?" He mumbled. I hissed at him to go back, but he peered through the peephole, his body stiffening. "It's Kaplan, just let her in." "Man." I grabbed his arm hard, whispering fiercely, "It's not her. Don't you remember the rule?" He tried to pull away, muttering, "She looks fine, you're paranoid." Then the voice came again, clearer, sweeter. "Andre, honey, don't you want to see your mother?" He froze, his breath hitching, eyes wide with tears. I realized the thing outside wasn't just pretending to be Kaplan. It was reaching deeper, using what it knew about us. Andre pressed his forehead to the door, whispering, "Mom," and my blood ran cold. I yanked him back with all my strength, dragging him into the kitchen, his nails raking my arm as he fought me. The knocking turned to pounding, the dish in Kaplan's hands rattling against the door, the smile stretching impossibly wide now, her jaw unhinging as if it would split her face in two. I shoved Andre against the wall, shouting into his face, "Look at me, that's not your mom, that's not Kaplan, it's the building, it's a mask." He sobbed, fists pounding my chest weakly, but I heard her, she knows my name. The pounding stopped suddenly, silence again. When I dared to peek through the peephole, the hall was empty. No dish, no Kaplan, no sound, just the flicker of the fluorescent overhead. Andre collapsed into a heap, rocking back and forth, whispering apologies to a mother who wasn't there. I bandaged the scratches on my arm, sat beside him, and realized the rules weren't warnings anymore, they were tests, pushing us closer and closer to the edge. In the morning I confronted Kaplan, the real one, her eyes narrowing when I described what happened. She didn't laugh, didn't scoff, just nodded gravely. "It's learning faster than it used to. It didn't call my name until years after I moved in. For you, it's only been weeks." I asked her what happened if you opened the door, if you let it in. Her voice cracked, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. "Then you don't come back out, or worse, you do. But it's not you anymore." She looked at me hard. "You must never open that door, Michael, no matter what face you see on the other side." That night I couldn't bring myself to sleep. Andre tossed and turned, muttering in his dreams, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, and I sat at the kitchen table with the rules spread out in front of me. The paper yellowed and fragile, but the words carved into my mind. Around 1:30, the apartment grew unbearably cold, frost creeping along the edges of the window despite the July heat outside. Then came the sound. Not knocking this time, but a dragging shuffle along the hallway, slow, deliberate. My skin crawled. I didn't dare look through the peephole, didn't dare breathe too loud. Then the whisper came, low, drawn out right against the door. "You're already mine." I clutched the paper in my fists, whispering the rules to myself until the sound faded with the cold. By dawn, exhaustion pulled me under, but even in my sleep I dreamt of Kaplan's face splitting wide, of Andre's eyes gone glassy, of the rules themselves burning one by one. When I woke, Andre was gone. His room empty, bed unmade, headphones left on the desk. I panicked, searched the building, called his phone, nothing. Finally, I found him in the laundry room, sitting on the floor staring at the dryers as if expecting them to speak. When I touched his shoulder, he looked at me with empty eyes. She was here, Kaplan. She told me I could go with her. She told me I'd be safe. My blood turned to ice. He was slipping further and further, and I knew if I didn't find a way to break whatever hold the building had, I was going to lose him completely. Andre left just after midnight, slamming the door behind him. His words still ringing in my ears. I can't stay here, man. She's in the walls. I can hear her even when you can't. I'll lose my mind if I stay another night. I begged him not to go, grabbed his arm, reminded him of the last rule, the one written in bold letters. But he pulled free, eyes wild, sweat on his forehead, muttering that he'd crash at the bar or a friend's place, anywhere but here. The lock clicked. His footsteps echoed down the hall, and then I was alone. The silence that followed wasn't relief, it was suffocating, pressing down on me like the air itself had weight. I checked the clock. 12:42 a.m. If he didn't come back, I'd have to survive the one thing I'd been dreading most, being alone after 2 a.m. I tried to distract myself, opened my laptop, but the screen lit up to a reflection that wasn't mine. Grinning, blinking out of sync, I slammed it shut and shoved it under the couch. My phone buzzed then, a text from Andre. Don't wait up. My throat tightened. He wasn't coming back tonight. I brewed coffee I didn't want. Just to have something warm in my hands, sat at the table with the paper unfolded in front of me, reading the rules again and again until the words blurred. But no matter how many times I repeated them, it didn't change the clock ticking closer to 2. At 1:37, the hallway light outside our door began to hum louder. Flickering, though we weren't on the 4th floor, the buzzing rattled through the walls, shaking the pictures, then stopped as suddenly as it began. I held my breath, every hair on my arm standing on end. At 1:50, I heard it, the faintest cry, like a baby muffled under blankets drifting from 3B. My hands shook. I shoved my fingers in my ears, rocked back and forth, whispered the rule, cover your ears, until the crying faded. The relief lasted less than a minute. At 2:03, every light in the apartment went out at once. Darkness swallowed me whole. The hum of the fridge, the radiator, even the city noise outside cut off, replaced by a silence so deep it felt alive. My phone lit up on the table, buzzing with a new notification. My heart stuttered when I read the words, "You broke the rule." My blood froze. I hadn't done anything, hadn't broken any of them. But then I realized it didn't matter, because Andre was gone, I was alone, and that was enough. A soft shuffle came from the bedroom. My bedroom, though I knew I hadn't been in there since yesterday. The door creaked, slow and deliberate, and from the blackness inside I heard my own voice. Calm, steady. "Michael, you don't have to fight anymore. Come inside. Rest." My hands went numb. The coffee cup slipped and shattered on the floor. I pressed myself against the wall, whispering, "No, no, no." But the voice came again, closer this time, like it was right behind the door. "You're tired. Let me take over." The air grew colder, my breath visible in the faint glow of my phone, and then the knock started. 3 sharp raps against the front door, the exact rhythm from the first night. My chest clenched. 2 rules colliding at once. I backed toward the kitchen, but the stove roared to life, flames leaping tall and blue, casting shadows that stretched across the walls, shifting into shapes that almost looked human. My phone buzzed again. Another notification. "Let us in." I dropped it, the screen cracking against the tile, the glow illuminating the crumpled rules on the floor. My own handwriting scrawled across the bottom. Though I never wrote it, Rule 8. Once you're alone, it's already too late. The door to the bedroom swung open then, slamming against the wall, and in the darkness I saw the outline of a figure step out, my height, my build, moving just slightly wrong. It tilted its head and in my own voice said, "You look exhausted. Let me help you." My knees buckled. I scrambled for the baseball bat leaning against the counter, clutching it with white knuckles. The figure stepped closer, its movements jerky like it was adjusting to the skin it wore, its grin widening. The flames on the stove flared higher. The baby's cries echoed from 3B. The knocks pounded at the door, every rule breaking down at once, twisting into chaos. I screamed, swinging the bat at the figure, but it dissolved into shadows that slithered back into the bedroom, leaving only the echo of my own laugh. The stove flames died instantly. The crying stopped. The knocks ceased. Silence fell heavy. My heart hammered so loud I thought it might burst. I grabbed the paper with trembling hands, clutching it like it was the only thing keeping me anchored. 2:41 a.m. Somehow I'd survived, but the rule was clear: never be alone after 2. I wasn't sure if I had broken it or if it had just been waiting for the chance. Either way, I knew one thing: next time I wouldn't make it through. When dawn finally came, Andre still hadn't returned. The apartment was quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only one in it anymore. Andre came back 2 nights later, looking worse than when he left. His face pale, lips chapped, a bruise blooming across his jaw like he'd gotten into a fight. He didn't explain where he'd been, just muttered something about trying to drown it out and collapsed onto the couch, headphones on but no sound coming through. I wanted to scream at him for leaving me alone, for nearly killing us both by breaking the rule, but the words caught in my throat when I saw his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. Something he'd never done before, and I realized he wasn't just running, he was unraveling. The building was pulling him apart piece by piece, and I was next. That night, after another hour of silence heavy as lead, I told him we had to leave. Not tomorrow, not next week now. He laughed bitterly. You think you can just walk out? You think it'll let us? But when I started shoving clothes into a bag, he didn't stop me. By 1 a.m., we were standing in the lobby, our bags slung over our shoulders. The air stale and heavy, like the building itself knew what we were doing. The elevator doors dinged open, the fluorescent light inside buzzing faintly. Andre stepped in first, jabbing the button for the ground floor like his life depended on it. My stomach twisted. Rule 3. If the hallway light on the 4th floor flickers, use the stairs, not the elevator. I told myself it didn't matter. We weren't on the 4th floor, we were going down, it was fine. But as the doors closed, I glanced up at the lobby fixture. The bulb blinked once, then again, then stuttered in a rapid pulse. My chest seized. I grabbed Andre's arm. Get out now! But the doors clamped shut and the elevator lurched. The numbers above us ticked down, 5-4, and then froze. The car shuddered violently, lights flickering, metal groaning around us. Andre slammed the button, swore under his breath. It's fine, it's just old, calm down. Then the lights went out completely. Darkness smothered us. I pressed against the wall, heart hammering, listening to the creak of cables, the hiss of something moving just beyond the walls. A faint scratching started, nails dragging across metal, circling the car. Andre lit his lighter, the tiny flame flickering, casting his face in a pale glow, sweat dripping down his temple. That's when we both saw it. In the reflection of the elevator doors, a third figure stood behind us. Tall, gaunt, its face blurred, features shifting like smoke but unmistakably watching. My breath caught, I spun around, but the car was empty. Only the reflection showed it. Andre whispered. She followed us and dropped the lighter, plunging us back into dark. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, the car trembling as if something was climbing its walls. I clawed at the emergency phone, but when I lifted the receiver, a voice hissed through, not static, but a whisper in my own voice. You can't leave. I dropped it, bile rising in my throat. Andre pressed his fists against the doors, shouting, "Let us out, damn it!" And the car lurched violently downward, throwing us against the walls, then stopped with a screech that rattled my bones. The lights blinked back on, faint and sickly yellow. The panel read 4. My blood turned to ice. The doors slid open onto the 4th floor. The hallway stretched ahead, long and narrow, the walls peeling, the light overhead flickering in a steady, mocking rhythm. The air stank of mildew and rot, thick enough to choke. Andre staggered out first, shoulders hunched, muttering, "We're out, we're out." I followed, clutching the paper of rules like a talisman, but the moment my foot crossed the threshold, the elevator doors slammed shut behind us and the ding echoed like laughter. The hall was empty, but I knew better. The building had brought us here for a reason. As we crept down the corridor, the light flickered faster, shadows stretching along the walls, forming shapes that didn't belong. At one door, 4C, we heard it, a low moan, then a giggle, childlike but warped. Andre froze, whispering, "That's her," his eyes wide, pupils blown. I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off violently, pounding on the door, shouting, "Why, stop hiding, I'm here." The knob rattled. The door cracked open an inch, and darkness deeper than night seeped out. The smell of smoke and rot flooding the hall. A small hand, pale and thin, reached through the gap. Andre fell to his knees, sobbing, reaching back. I yanked him away with every ounce of strength, slamming the door shut, my chest heaving. But the light overhead exploded, plunging the hall into strobing flashes. Shadows flickering across the walls, faces leering from the peeling paint. Andre thrashed in my grip, screaming, "She needs me," his voice breaking. I slapped him hard across the face, shouting, "It's not her, it's never her." He froze, chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. Then the hallway fell silent, the light flickering one last time before holding steady. We stumbled toward the stairwell at the end, my legs trembling, my throat raw. I shoved the door open and the smell of rust and dust washed over us, the stairwell stretching down into black. Andre clung to the railing, muttering curses, and we began the descent. The steps groaned under our weight, but at least we were moving. By the time we reached the lobby again, my hands were shaking so badly, I could barely fit the key into our apartment lock. We collapsed inside, the door shut behind us, both of us gasping like we'd run a marathon. Andre sat on the floor with his head in his hands, whispering, "It won't let us go." And he was right. I knew it now more than ever. The rules weren't about surviving the building until we left. They were about keeping us trapped inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that the elevator hadn't just taken us to the 4th floor, but somewhere we weren't supposed to be. The smell of mildew and smoke still clung to my clothes long after we got back to the apartment, and Andre refused to speak. Just sat in his room staring at the wall like if he blinked he'd be dragged back there. I knew I needed answers, and the only person who had them was Kaplan. The next morning I knocked on her door, my hands trembling, and for a long moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then the chain rattled and she peered out with bloodshot eyes, studying me in silence before finally letting me in. Her apartment was even darker than I remembered. Curtains drawn tight, not a single light on except for a weak lamp in the corner. I sat at her table while she shuffled around, her movements slow, deliberate, like she was carrying the weight of years on her shoulders. She set down 2 cups of coffee and lit another cigarette, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. "You went in the elevator, didn't you?" she said finally, her voice flat but accusing. I nodded, unable to lie. She closed her eyes, muttered a prayer in Yiddish under her breath, then leaned forward, her gaze sharp despite her frail frame. "That's how it gets you. Every rule isn't just a warning, it's a bargain. You follow them, you live. You break them, it feeds. But no matter what you do, you never leave." My stomach turned. I asked her what she meant. Why we couldn't just pack up and move out. Why the rules would matter once we were gone. She shook her head, her mouth twisting into a bitter smile. "Because the building isn't just a place. It's a mouth. And once you're inside, it doesn't let go." She pulled open a drawer and slid a worn notebook across the table. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed, filled with cramped handwriting. "This belonged to my son," she said softly, her voice breaking for the first time. "He was born here. He grew up with the crying, the knocks, the fire. I tried to protect him with the rules, but one night he broke one. The fire took him." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, her face hardening. "The man you saw in the flames? He was real once. His name was Vernon Hale, the caretaker back when this was a boarding house. He was cruel. He'd lock children in the basement when their parents didn't pay, beat the tenants, took what he wanted. When he died, they found his body in the furnace room, burned alive, but his spirit didn't leave. It sank into the walls, into the pipes, into the very bones of this place. He became the hunger. The rules are the only thing that keeps him from devouring us outright." I flipped through the notebook, my hands shaking, the pages filled with scribbles. Drawings of faces half-formed, words like "don't look" scrawled over and over. One entry caught my eye. He offered me peace if I let him in. He said the crying would stop. I looked up at Kaplan, my chest tight. "That's what Andre keeps saying," I whispered. Kaplan nodded grimly. "Then he's marked. It won't stop until it gets him. Or you." My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Andre. "She's here again. She wants me to go with her." My blood froze. I bolted from Kaplan's apartment, sprinted down the hall, and burst into ours. Andre was standing by the front door, his hand on the knob, his face slack, tears streaming down his cheeks. He looked at me like a child caught in a lie, whispering, "She said if I go, it'll end." I ripped his hand from the knob, shouting, "It's not her, it's never her," but he fought me, stronger than I'd ever seen him, his fist slamming into my chest, his voice raw. "You don't understand. I can't take it anymore." I shoved him back, locked the deadbolt, pressed my back against the door. He collapsed onto the floor, sobbing into his hands. I pulled out the notebook, shoved it in front of him, forced him to look at the words written by Kaplan's son. "This is what happens, Andre. This is how it ends." He pushed it away, shaking his head violently, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. That night, neither of us slept. We sat in the living room, the rules between us like scripture, the notebook open to the last page. At 1:30, the stove clicked on, flames roaring high. At 1:45, the baby's cries echoed from 3B. At 2, the knocking started, steady and patient. The building was testing us, pushing every rule at once, and Andre's eyes glazed over as he rocked back and forth, whispering, "She's in the fire, she's in the crying, she's everywhere." I clutched his shoulder, begging him to stay with me, repeating the rules over and over until dawn finally came and the sounds faded, leaving us trembling wrecks. When the sun rose, Andre disappeared into his room, slamming the door, refusing to answer me. I sat at the table with the notebook, Kaplan's words echoing in my head. The rules weren't just survival. They were a leash, binding us to Vernon Hale's hunger, feeding him slowly night after night. And sooner or later, one of us was going to break completely. I woke up on the couch with sunlight streaming through the blinds and no memory of falling asleep. The last thing I remembered was sitting at the table with the notebook open in front of me, Andre pacing like a caged animal, muttering under his breath. And then nothing. A gap where hours should have been. My phone said 10:12 a.m., but the last time I checked the clock, it had been just after 3. I rubbed my temples, the pounding in my skull sharp and insistent, like a hangover without drinking. Andre's door was shut, but faint music leaked through, low and distorted, not like anything I'd heard before, voices layered under static. I knocked. No answer. I pushed the door open and found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, headphones plugged into nothing, eyes rolled back slightly, lips moving in time with the noise. My stomach dropped. I shook him hard until he blinked back into focus, snarling, "Don't do that! You scared her." His voice cracked like he'd been screaming all night. I asked him who her was, but he just laughed, hollow and broken. "She's the one keeping me company. You don't get it, do you? You're not supposed to fight it, you're supposed to let it in." I backed out, shut his door, and clutched the paper of rules as if the words could anchor me. But when I unfolded it, something was different. A new line was scrawled at the bottom in handwriting that looked eerily like mine. Rule 8. If you lose time, don't try to remember it. My chest tightened, bile rising in my throat. I hadn't written that, or had I? That night I set alarms on my phone for every hour, determined to stay awake, to track every minute. From midnight to 1, the apartment was silent except for Andre's low murmurs. At 1:15, the stove clicked, flames hissing tall. I ignored them, kept my eyes on the clock. At 1:47, the crying from 3B started, thin and sharp like nails on glass. I shoved my fingers in my ears, rocked back and forth, muttering. At 2:01, the knocks began, steady and patient, and my phone buzzed with a new message. No number, just text that read, "You're already forgetting." I nearly threw it across the room. The next thing I knew, my alarm was going off at 5 a.m. My coffee was cold in my hand, my shirt damp with sweat, and I had no memory of the past 3 hours. I checked the paper again. The ink of Rule 8 looked darker, fresher, as if it had just been written. My knees buckled. Kaplan had warned me the building was learning faster, but I didn't realize it could get inside my head, rewrite the rules themselves. I went to Kaplan that afternoon, desperate. She opened the door slower this time, her face gaunt, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. When I shoved the paper in front of her, she didn't even blink, just nodded sadly. "It's begun," she said flatly. "Once the building starts writing for you, you're part of it. Every gap you can't remember isn't empty. It's feeding, and when you try to claw back what you lost, that's when it takes the rest." Her voice broke on the last word, her eyes wet. "That's how it took my son. He started keeping journals, filling the blanks, and one night I woke up and he was gone. All that was left was his handwriting covering the walls." She gripped my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't write it down. Don't dig. Forget. It's the only chance you have." I stumbled back into the hallway, her words echoing, my skin crawling. Forget? How could I forget when forgetting meant losing pieces of myself? When I got back, Andre was gone. His door wide open, bed empty, headphones abandoned. My chest clenched. I ran down the stairwell, checked the lobby, nothing. When I came back up, I found him in the 4th floor hallway, standing under the flickering light, His face was slack, his lips moving, whispering to the shadows. "She showed me what you did, Michael," he said without looking at me. "You tried to stop me, but she says you're the real problem. If you'd just leave me alone, I could go with her and it would all stop." My throat closed. He was too far gone. I dragged him back down the stairs, ignoring his screams, his fists pounding my chest. Inside the apartment, he collapsed on the floor, sobbing, then laughing, then silent. I sat in the kitchen, clutching the bat. The rules spread out before me, the ink of Rule 8 seared into my vision. Midnight came again, and with it the gaps. I fought to stay awake, but my eyes slipped closed for just a second. When I opened them, the clock read 3:33 and Andre was gone. The stove was cold, the hallway quiet, the rules still on the table but now smeared with something dark, like ash or dried blood. My phone buzzed. A new message. "Stop looking. Stop remembering. It's not yours anymore." I wanted to run, to smash through the door and never look back, but Kaplan's voice rang in my head. The way she said, "The building doesn't let go once you're inside." I stared at the rules until dawn, whispering them like prayers, but deep down I knew they weren't mine anymore. They belonged to it. Andre didn't come back that night. His room stayed empty, bed unmade, the air heavy with the smell of his sweat and smoke, but no sound of his voice, no thump of his footsteps. I sat at the kitchen table, gripping the rules like they could hold the world together, whispering them under my breath until my throat was raw. But when dawn broke, he still wasn't there. I checked every floor, knocked on Kaplan's door, even searched the basement, but it was like he'd vanished into the walls. My phone buzzed around noon with a single text from his number. "Don't wait up." My stomach sank. That was the same phrase the building had sent me before. I deleted it without replying, hands shaking. By late afternoon, I was pacing the living room, wondering if I should just run, consequences be damned, when the door clicked. Andre walked in. Or at least something that looked like him. His clothes were the same, his hair messy, his headphones looped around his neck, but his movements were too smooth, like someone wearing his skin for the first time. He smiled at me, wide and wrong. "Sorry, man, needed some air." My blood froze. Andre never smiled like that. He dropped onto the couch like nothing had happened, grabbed a beer from the fridge, cracked it open with steady hands. Too steady. I sat across from him, trying to stay calm. "Where were you?" I asked. He shrugged. "Out. You worry too much." His eyes flicked to the rules on the table, then back to me, and for a split second his smile slipped, his lips twitching into something sharper. I gripped the bat under the table. "You remember the rules, right?" I asked. He chuckled. "Of course. Don't open the door, don't look in the mirrors, don't listen to the crying. We've been over this 100 times. But he didn't mention the stove or being alone after 2 a.m., and I knew right then he wasn't Andre. That night I locked my bedroom door for the first time since moving in. At 1:15 I heard the stove click, flames hissing tall, and then footsteps pacing the hallway, slow, deliberate. Then his voice just outside my door. "Michael, open up. I can't sleep alone." My chest clenched. Andre had never once admitted he couldn't sleep, not even when he was unraveling. The footsteps circled, the floor creaking. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the bat, whispering the rules like prayers. Then came the sound of scratching, claws dragging down the wood of my door, and the voice again, softer now, almost kind. "You don't have to fight anymore. Let me in." I didn't move, didn't breathe. Hours stretched like years until the scratching stopped. When I opened the door at dawn, the hallway was empty. Andre's door was open, his bed untouched. I went to Kaplan, desperate, the notebook clutched in my hand. She opened the door slowly, studying my face, and before I spoke she said, "He's gone, isn't he?" My throat closed, I nodded. She pulled me inside, shut the door, lit another cigarette. "It replaces them," she whispered. "One by one. It took my husband first, then my son. They looked the same when they came back, spoke the same. But little things were wrong. The way he held a fork, the way he tied his shoes. It's not them. It never is. It's the building wearing them like masks. And once you start doubting what's real, it wins." I wanted to scream, to throw the notebook across the room, but instead I asked, "So what do I do?" She looked at me with hollow eyes. "You wait. You survive. That's all you can do. Unless you want to end it on your terms." She gestured to the revolver on her table, the barrel dark and heavy. My stomach turned. That night, the replacement Andre sat at the table with me, sipping a beer. humming along to music that wasn't playing. Every so often he glanced at me with that too wide smile. Around 1:30 he leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "You don't trust me anymore, do you?" I gripped the bat tighter, my mouth dry. He laughed, low and cold. "Doesn't matter. You'll forget soon enough. You're already forgetting." And then he walked into his room and shut the door. I sat there until dawn, staring at the rules, the ink of Rule 8 darker than ever, like it was burning into the page. And I knew Kaplan was right. Andre was gone, and whatever was left wasn't him. I didn't sleep the night after Andre shut his door with that smile plastered across his face. I sat at the kitchen table gripping the bat. The rules spread out in front of me, the ink darker, almost wet to the touch, like it was being written and rewritten as I watched. The list looked shorter somehow, words blurred at the edges, and Rule 8 pulsed like a wound. Around 2:17 I heard it. His voice, not from his room but from the hallway outside, calling my name softly. "Michael, come here. I want to show you something." My stomach twisted. He had never called me by my full name, not once, always Mike or Man, never Michael. I pressed my palms into my ears, whispering the rules, but the paper in front of me rippled, the letters shifting. A new line appeared at the bottom in fresh ink that looked like blood. Rule 9. If you reach the end, you must choose who takes your place. My breath caught. There had never been a Rule 9. My vision blurred, my hands shaking so violently I dropped the bat. The door to Andre's room creaked open. He stepped out, or what wore him did, moving too smoothly, his eyes too bright. He sat across from me, folded his hands neatly on the table, and smiled. "You've done well," he said in a voice that was his and not his. "You've lasted longer than most." My throat closed, I couldn't answer. He leaned closer, whispering, "But you know it won't last forever. You can't hold on when the building wants you. Sooner or later you'll hand it over." He tapped the paper with one finger, smearing the ink. "Choose wisely." I stumbled out into the hallway, desperate for Kaplan. I banged on her door, shouting her name, but no answer. The door creaked open on its own, and inside her apartment was empty, stripped bare, no furniture, no curtains, no lamp, just dust and walls peeling with mold. My chest tightened. She had been here yesterday. She had spoken to me, but now there was no trace. On the wall above the table, written in the same dark ink as the rules, were the words, "She chose wrong." I staggered back, bile rising in my throat, sprinted down the hall, but every door I passed was locked, the numbers repeating. 3A, 3B, 3C, again and again, like I was running in a loop. The crying started, the baby's voice echoing from behind every door now, high and shrill. "Help me, Michael, please," until it was all I could hear. I slammed back into my apartment, locked the door, pressed my back against it, shaking. Andre sat calmly on the couch, beer in his hand, humming tunelessly. He looked up at me with that too wide smile. "So, did you find what you needed?" His voice was soft, mocking. I gripped the bat, but my hands trembled too badly to lift it. He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "It doesn't matter. You'll forget anyway. You'll wake up tomorrow and pieces of you will be gone. And one day you'll open your eyes and you'll be me. That's the way it works." He drained his beer, set the bottle down with deliberate care, and whispered, "It's already happening. Check the paper." I forced my eyes down to the rules. The page was nearly black with ink now, the words crawling across themselves, but I could still make out the top. Rule 1. Do not open the door when the knocking comes after midnight. Rule 2. Cover the mirrors. Rule 3. Don't take the elevator if the lights flicker. They all bled, until only one line remained clear at the bottom. Final rule. Don't tell them. Don't warn them. If you speak of this, it finds them too. My blood turned to ice. I looked up at Andre, but his chair was empty. I spun around, bat raised, but the apartment was silent. He was gone. I sat at the table until dawn, the rules in front of me, my head pounding, gaps in my memory widening. I don't know how long I've been here now. Days, weeks? I can't remember when I last left the apartment. I know only that the rules change every night, that the building whispers in my voice, that sometimes I see Kaplan in the hallway, and sometimes I see my own face smiling back at me from the stove flames. I don't know how much longer I can hold on before I become another mask for it to wear, so I'm writing this down, even though I know what the paper says about remembering, about warning. I don't care anymore. Because if you're hearing this, if you've stayed with me this long, then maybe you'll understand. The building feeds on silence, on secrets. It wants me to shut up, to let it take me quietly. but I won't. If you ever move into a place like this, if you ever find a list of rules taped to your fridge, if you ever hear knocking at midnight, don't open the door. Don't let it in. And if you hear someone crying from apartment 3B, if you see Mrs. Kaplan after midnight, if you smell gas and see a man in the fire, if you lose time and can't remember where it went, don't try to fill the blanks. Don't write it down. Don't look too closely at your own reflection, because it's waiting there in the dark behind your shoulder smiling. I don't know how much of me is left or if this is even my voice anymore, but if you've been listening, if you've been watching, then it knows you too. It always does. So here's my last warning, my last plea. Don't open the door after midnight ever.